I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Wendell Taylor. We do a brief bio. Wendell is the managing partner of Hunt & Andrews Kurth's Washington, D.C. office, which has approximately 180 attorneys. Wendell represents businesses and individuals in complex federal trial litigation. He's committed to pro bono legal services and represents domestic violence victims, seeking protective orders through the firm's partnership with the Legal Aid Services of Northern Virginia. Wendell previously served as counsel to Deputy Attorney General James Comey at the U.S. Department of Justice, where he helped manage the antitrust, tax, and civil divisions, as well as the Office of the Pardon Attorney, the Community Relations Service, and the U.S. Parole Commission. Wendell also served as a special assistant U.S. attorney in the District of Columbia, where he handled all aspects of federal trial litigation. Wendell is a member of the Board of Trustees of the University of Richmond and a member of the Fourth Circuit Judicial Conference. He sits on the board of directors of the Military Bowl, presented by Northrop Grumman, a postseason college football bowl game benefiting the USO and other organizations supporting our troops and their families. Wendell received his JD from the University of Richmond School of Law, where he served as SBA president, and his BA from Wake Forest University. He's also a graduate of the Sorensen Institute for Political Leadership at the University of Virginia. Ladies and gentlemen, Wendell Taylor.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Yeah, actually wore the colors. It's Saturday afternoon, so I'm really honored to be speaking here. I know I've been to conferences that have taken place over the weekend. About 4 o'clock on Saturday, I was already by the pool, so thank you all for listening to this and for that warm reception. You got a little late than the rest of you, yes. But just to be clear, I'm not going to speak for an hour. I know it's an hour on the schedule. You can ask questions later if you like to keep going, but nobody wants to hear an hour-long speech at 4 o'clock on a Saturday. If you think about it, that would be about 6 or 7 straight TED Talks, and there's no way I'm going to give you those. So I'm going to shoot for about 3 straight TED Talks, and then we can make our way to the impending happy hour. I understand that I'm speaking to undergrads, law students, as well as practitioners. And that I'm here to provide leadership advice to all 3 groups. It's tough. Those groups are really, really different. I've always felt that the practice of law is really disjointed in itself, right? Like, the LSAT doesn't prepare you for law school doesn't prepare you for the bar doesn't prepare you for practicing law, and don't even get me started about how much different an associate is than a partner at a law firm. They're all very disjointed, but I'll try to give advice that applies to each of the diverse groups in this audience. So I'll start with a disclaimer. I've got a daughter, she's 12, her name's Ava. I love her, she's great. She helps me with things like this. We bounce around ideas off each other. Whenever I have a speaking engagement, I sit down and talk to her and tell her what I'm to present, and she gives me really good advice. I also host our new partner roast every year, and she's a really good joke writer. But this time I told her that I was a keynote speaker at a leadership conference, and she said very sternly to be careful what you say. And I nodded like I understood, but I didn't. I took it to mean that she didn't want me to say anything that would be misconstrued or, taken out of context or would be a bad soundbite. Like, don't end up on World Star, right? That's what I thought she meant. Well, I was wrong. I should have known what she meant, because if you know her, she's a little bit Machiavellian. So she sensed that I wasn't very clear about what exactly she meant. So she said, no, Dad, don't give them the best leadership advice you have. If you do, then they'll be just as good leaders as you are, and then they might try to come take your job as managing partner. So instead, just give them the leadership advice that you used like 5 years ago. That's a direct quote. That is a direct quote.
I like that.
Yeah, he's correct. Don't worry, we won't tell Ava. I'm not going to give you any outdated leadership advice. You'll get the super duper up-to-date leadership advice right here, right now. Okay, so I'm going to tell you 3 stories from my past that helped shape who I am today. these are events in my life that have directly led to my ability to be an effective leader. All three stories are about adversity and how I grew from those experiences. As Lou Holtz, the famed football coach, once said, "Show me someone who has done something worthwhile, and I'll show you someone who has overcome adversity." If you think about it, simply facing adversity is not the key here, it's overcoming it. Overcoming it is the thing that forges the resolve for growth. So these stories all center around growth through adversity. But first, let me apologize to the millennials in the room. I'm going to start a long time ago in a land far, far away, even before you were born. So let's go back to Richmond, Virginia, where I grew up. I grew up in the inner city in Richmond, just a few hours, down I-95 South, depending on the time of day when you leave. We have any Richmond folks here? Oh, there's one over there. All right. Well, in the 80s and 90s, Richmond, the city of Richmond, was a war zone. It was one of the deadliest cities per capita in the country. But of all the murders that took place during those times, nothing gripped the city like the Browley brothers murders. The Browley brothers seemed to kill seemingly at random. They killed a lot of people. But luckily they were arrested, convicted, and were on death row. And the city exhaled a collective sigh of relief. But then the Browley brothers escaped from death row. These guys, they were the first and only in the history of the country to escape death row, and they did so in May of 1984. They were eventually captured, but I was in middle school at that time. I lived in an okay neighborhood, but because of the crazy and contorted busing system in Richmond, I was bused across town to one of the worst parts of the city, and I went to a middle school called Mosby. And I was going to school, in middle school, with the cousins of the Browley brothers. Mm-hmm. I was terrified. I kept to myself. I was a shy, nerdy kid. And, I survived 6th grade and 7th grade. And then, stayed out of the way of the cousins of the Browley brothers. But in 8th grade, I was in class, and a police officer came to my classroom. He was there for my protection. He escorted me out of class into the principal's office and sat with me for the rest of the day and watched me as I got on the bus and was there the next morning to watch me get on the bus and take me to school. The reason was the only other boy in my class of about 20, so it was all girls and 2 boys, and the other boy had just gotten beaten up and sent to the hospital, and the school thought that I was next. So I had a police escort for a week. As I was being escorted, I had to come up with a plan. My shy and nerdy demeanor was literally dangerous to my health. So I decided that I needed to become a jock, or at least fake being a jock. So I tried out for the basketball team, and it made all the difference. I wasn't a basketball star, but it sure beat having a police escort to class. And so my interest in organized sports was entirely out of necessity. It gave me much needed credibility among my peers. It was a survival tactic. The next year in high school, I tried out for the JV football team. I made the team and was quickly moved up to varsity. And I never really enjoyed playing football. I hated the August heat. Kind of feels like that now in DC, right? I hated the yelling coaches, hated the smelly locker rooms. I hated the locker room, antics. Winning was fun, but we didn't do very much of that. But sports helped to mask my nerdiness, and so it served a purpose. But I never really internalized the popularity that came with being an athlete. I was pretty cynical about it, because how crazy was it that I went from a nerdy and popular kid to a popular kid just because I could run fast and hit hard? It made no sense to me. Anyway, my athletic talents earned me a football scholarship to Wake Forest. Go Deeks, I'm contractually obligated to say that. I say that I went to Wake. And even to this day, no matter how many accomplishments I have, someone will come up and say, wait, but didn't you play football in college? And that's like the one thing that people really like about my career. So I'm really happy that it happened, and it was all really out of necessity. So being a good leader requires you to be strategic. Being a leader requires you to be a problem solver. I had a plan. I played sports for protection, It didn't matter that I hated it, and as the pre-law students will soon find out, hating something but doing it for a purpose is a really good way to describe law school. Being a good leader requires you to stay grounded. I went from a guy needing a police escort to Mr. Popularity overnight because of sports, but never internalized it. I was the same person before and after, and I didn't let it go to my head. Being a good leader requires you to have empathy. That one came easy to me, because even as a football star, I was still that shy, nerdy kid from before. And I was still friends with all the other shy, nerdy kids. And always hated kids being picked on, because I was one of those kids being picked on before I became a fake child. All right, story number 2. So off I went to Wake Forest. Go Deeks. Come on, everybody. Go Deeks. All right, thank you. I didn't think you would do that. Yeah, that's, yeah, no idea.
No one knows what Deeks.
Oh, good. So off to Wake I went. Wake didn't win very many games my first couple of years, but I was, pretty good on the field, pretty good in the classroom. Midway through my college career, I remember being out with my friends in August before I went back to Wake for practice, and I felt something weird. It felt like a pimple in like the roof of my mouth. I tried to ignore it, but it was like having something in your eye. It was like something you just couldn't ignore. I was fixated on it. Over the next couple of days, more and more of these things popped up in my mouth. Not only that, they would open and stay raw. Within a week, my mouth and throat were covered, and it was too painful to chew food or swallow, or even swallow at all. I survived on scrambled eggs and protein shakes, numbing my mouth with Chloraseptic before every bite. I went from doctor to doctor, and my condition went undiagnosed and untreated for months. I played that entire season, the last one I ever played, and started out that season weighing about 230 pounds. By the end of the season, I was down to under 190 pounds. My eyes were constantly bloodshot from whatever was happening to me. They would even pus and bleed. And I have this weird picture where I was in the bathroom looking at myself and peeling the pus off my eyes and watching them bleed. I remember one game during that season, I played linebacker, I made a tackle, I went to the huddle to call the next play. My teammates looked at me like I was a ghost because my eyes and mouth were both bleeding. I was escorted off the field after the teammates called a timeout, and I didn't play that game anymore, but I played the rest of the season. Fast forward to the last game, played my last game, played my heart out, had a really good last game of that season, knowing that it would be the last game I ever played. But on the bus to the airport, I felt something weird on my forehead. It was a pimple. It was just like the one in my mouth, but it was the first time it had been on my skin. Just like the one in my mouth, it would open and bleed and not stop, and within 2 weeks, my body was covered with these things. It was a winter, but I couldn't sleep under covers because I'd have to literally peel the sheets off me in the morning. Had no idea what was wrong, but I was sure I was dying, and the doctors had no clue either. One doctor with a horrible bedside manner asked my mother to leave the room so he could talk to me in private. He asked had I ever had sexual intercourse. I had not. He said with a resigned tone in his voice, well, the only thing I can think of is AIDS. Mind you, this was back in the 90s when we didn't realize how you could contract AIDS. So being a 21-year-old virgin didn't seem to sway the doctor's assessment that I was actually dying of AIDS. I was tested, and after 4 days of panicking, waiting for the results, and lying to my mom about why she had to leave the room, the test was administered, and it was negative. Needless to say, I never went to that doctor again. But finally, after seeing several other doctors, I was diagnosed before my body killed itself. I was diagnosed with pemphigus vulgaris, an autoimmune genetic disorder signified by a hyperactive immune system, which was literally killing my body. So where AIDS suppresses your immune system, my immune system was in overdrive. And with nothing to fight, it was fighting itself. That's not me, but that's kind of how it looked on parts of my body, or all over. So that doctor with the horrible bedside manner was either really, really close or really, really far off, depending on your perspective. Also, this genetic disorder was fatal until the 1970s. Once I was diagnosed, it was quickly treated, and although I couldn't play football anymore because of all the banned substances I was taking to suppress my overactive immune system, I was fine. Anyway, when it was all over, I remembered being at home and covered in lesions, contemplating life. And I thought, that I hadn't really lived. Not just because I was young, I hadn't really lived. I was a good but not great student. I was a good but not great football player. I didn't do anything exceptional, good or bad. I was a quiet, nerdy kid pretending to be a jock, and I was dying as a 21-year-old virgin. The humanity. So the illness set me in a different course. Post-illness, I felt like I was on borrowed time. And why not make the most of borrowed time? I made a deal with myself that I wouldn't be average anymore, that I would live life to the fullest. Contemplating death really made me analyze life. Just think about the things that you want to accomplish in life, or experiences you want to have. Now think about how you'd feel if you knew you had no more time to do so. That's how I felt. It was painful to think about, but I didn't die. And I had more time to not be average. For me, the biggest change was to not run from fears, to overcome the fears. I really thought about how overcoming the fears in the best way possible to challenge my resolve for this. And I thought to myself, what is the scariest thing I can think of? And in college, law school, in the first semester, Socratic method seemed the scariest. So I went to law school. I'd look death in the face. Nothing could be more scary than that, even hazing law professors. Being a good leader means you have to overcome your fears. Fears of being second-guessed, fears of making bad decisions, fears of making painful, tough decisions. You have to let those feelings go and lead you to the resolve of someone on borrowed time. As I mentioned, the near-death experience also helped me in the effort category. When I thought of how I was dying, I was troubled about the fact that I hadn't tried my best, because there is no more peace, no greater peace in the contentment of trying your best, even if you don't succeed. Being a good leader means you have to always try your best. People are counting on you to do so, to set an example, to lead by example. Finally, this experience taught me that I needed to have more fun in life. And for those wondering, I did have sex that year. And as you can tell, I don't take myself too seriously. And being a good leader means that you have to have fun and not take yourself too seriously. Those adversities help shape who I am today. Now, not everyone can be lucky enough to have a near-death experience to shock them into shape, but it really did the trick for me. But no matter how big or small, we all face adversity, and how we handle that adversity has as much to do with who we are as anything else. We all love the good times, but the bad times are the times that forge the resolve to grow. Luckily for me, there was more adversity to come. Story number 3. Fast forward to my second summer of law school. I was working as a prosecutor in Richmond. It was a great summer. I was able to try actual cases as a law student. I wrote a fair number of briefs that summer as well. On this particular day, I didn't have court, so I was working on a brief. And rather than sit in my cubicle at the prosecutor's office, I went to the law school where I had an office as a student bar president. I was writing a brief for the government that day, a suppression motion, opposition to a suppression motion, defending a police officer's stop and subsequent search of a black guy at a bus station. After several hours of writing, I took a break and walked downstairs from my office and was about to walk into the law library when I was approached by a man. We exchanged hellos, and he asked if I went to school there. I said yes. I extended my hand and introduced myself. Instead of shaking my hand, he grabbed my short sleeve shirt and demanded that I show him the tattoo on my arm. That's when I realized he was a police officer. I don't have a tattoo on my arm, and I told him to get his hands off me. Down the hall, I saw a police officer in uniform coming through the door and walking towards us. I said to the plainclothes officer, "What's the description of the person you're looking for?" To my surprise, he answered. He said 5'9", 185. I said, "I'm 6'2", and I haven't been that close to 185 since I was on my deathbed," and I started to walk away. As I started to walk away, he grabbed me around my waist, pushed me against the wall. He was yelling at me, and he was in my face, nose to nose. In retrospect, he was baiting me into giving him a reason to arrest me and charge me with something, or worse. Because if I pushed back, or ran, or made a movement towards him, I may not be here today. We've all seen the videos. Instead, I put my hands up, quoted the very cases that I've been citing to defend a police officer's stop of a black guy. And I told him, he did not have reasonable suspicion to stop me. I said, "You should arrest me if you think you do." Mind you, he's talking to a guy, quoting case law, in a law building, in front of a law library. You'd think that would be enough for him to question whether he stopped the right guy. The encounter ended when a dean's assistant came running out and she said, "That's Wendell, he's our president. You can't do these type things to black people." I went down to the student union to process what had happened, and came back up, and they were in fact arresting someone who was about 5'8" and was closer to most of your complexions than mine. But anyway, being a good leader requires being cool under pressure. Had I let my emotions get to me, or had I thought about all the previous times when I'd had negative encounters with police, I may have reacted differently, and maybe I wouldn't be here today to tell you this story. Being a good leader requires that you be rational. I was able to understand in a very tense and high-stakes moment that resisting could have been deadly. If a police officer wants to arrest you, physically refusing to be arrested doesn't seem to be the answer. Even if you have the right to resist, a bad cop could end your life. Let the officer arrest you and fight the system. Because refusing to be arrested could, and often does, get you killed. Even in the spur of the moment, getting arrested seemed like the best way out of it for me. Fighting back would surely have been worse. I wanted them to arrest me, and I wanted the world to know what happened. So I reached out to the media outlets in Richmond, and almost none of them would touch the story at all, except the Richmond Free Press. Well, there's a slide that's supposed to be here. That's an article. That's me.
Well
written. It's a headline. Actually, I will show you. Guess we don't have it, but here it is. Mistaken identity. U of R law student roughed up. Can everybody see this? Most people, yeah. So imagine if this had happened in the age of social media. Anyway, I have this article prominently displayed in my office. So to recap, being a good leader means being a strategic problem solver that thinks of creative solutions. Being a good leader means you have to always have empathy for others, always treat people the same, overcome your fears that are holding back your greatness. Being a good leader means that you have to take comfort in making tough decisions. Always try your best and spare yourself the regrets of not. Don't take yourself too seriously, have fun, stay cool under pressure, and stay rational. And let me just slide. Here I am at my law school graduation as a graduation speaker. Doesn't really have a lot to do with this talk, but I wanted to show you. It's a funny picture too. It looks like there's only one person in the audience. But I will assure you there were people on the other side. I gave a really good speech that day too. I compared law school to high school and talked about how close they were. And then I did senior superlatives law school style and gave away, awards like class couple and class flirt and things like that. And then, law-related ones like most likely to be appointed independent counsel to investigate a future president. Which is, eerily fitting for today again. And then I, finished with, most likely to succeed and talked about, how we're all, able to succeed if we define success in our own terms, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, it was a fun day. Well, I can tell you tons of stories about leadership and my leadership skills. I'm gonna leave you with a couple of quick ones. As you heard, I work for Jim Comey, and I think he embodies a lot of the lessons that I've talked about today. I know he's gone from being a darling of both parties to a man without a party. So I know it's pretty risky to say anything positive about Jim Comey right now, but I feel like I've garnered a little bit of goodwill with you. So please indulge me on this one. Anyway, it was 2003. I was hired as his counsel when he was Deputy Attorney General under General Ashcroft. He hired me over the objection of the White House. I'm not a Republican. That didn't matter to Jim Comey. I was 31 years old, and just a couple of months later, in March of '04, was the now infamous race to General Ashcroft's hospital bed when Jim Comey was acting AG, and he and then FBI Director Mueller were on one side, and Andy Card, who was White House Chief of Staff, Alberto Gonzalez, who was White House counsel, were on the other, and they were debating the reauthorization of the domestic wiretapping program. I was there with Jim, before he got whisked away that day. Fascinating time to be in DOJ. If you haven't heard that story and you're living under a rock, then I'll be happy to tell the rest of it over a drink later. But I was counsel to the DAG, and I helped manage certain components, which you heard. I worked with the Civil Division, Antitrust Division, Parole Commission, and others. I also helped to oversee the honors program and the summer law internship program. My task there was to provide a leadership office review of applicants. So if you applied through those programs and a DOJ component wanted to interview you, the leadership offices, the DAG's office, AG's office, had the ability to nix the interview if you were not minimally qualified to work at Justice. There was no real definition to what that meant, but the term was if they're not minimally qualified, then they don't even get an interview, even though you had matched with a component. So Jim asked me to handle this review, and I thought that one person shouldn't be solely responsible for this review. I had the foresight to see the pitfalls of such a process. So I thought strategically and came up with a plan. We put together a committee of 5 to 7 people from the 2 leadership offices. We set the conference room, we split up 1,000 or so resumes, and did a first level review. And if you wanted to cut anyone, you had to put that resume aside. And then when everyone was done with the first level review, you had to justify to the group why the person should not at least get an interview. And I felt like that would cut out any nefarious actions that would take place. I was also strategic about who I picked for that review, and I thought the process was fair and open. I did that from the time I started with Jim until the fall of 2005 when I left to be a prosecutor in DC. A few years later, when I was back in private practice at Hunton, the Bush administration was facing scrutiny for its firing of several U.S. attorneys. The allegation was that they had done so for political purposes when the administration claimed it was for performance reasons. Because of the firestorm around this issue, there were several investigations opened regarding hiring and firing practices in administration. That's when I got a call from the DOJ Inspector General asking about my involvement in the process, in honors program and slip, and asking for an under oath interview. It was a terrifying call. My firm mentor recommended that I reject the request for an under oath interview. But I was confident that I hadn't done anything wrong, and also thought an under oath interview was preferable to a congressional subpoena or something like that. And C-SPAN, I did not want in my future. So I sat for the interview, explained my involvement in the process, and at the same time, the investigation did a statistical analysis of the resumes. And the investigation was into whether, there were essentially Democrats being weeded out of the process. As you can see, they looked for, through the years that I was there, and a few years before I was there, and one more when I left. And here's what they found. They found misconduct in every year except the years when I was involved in the process. The lessons I learned from the stories I've shared with you came into play at DOJ and throughout my career. And now, as managing partner of Hunton's DC office, I apply them regularly. Even getting the role as office managing partner took a fair amount of foresight and strategy, as we were talking about earlier. Hunton's DC office turned 50 in 2017. Until about 5 years ago, we had only had 3 office managing partners in roughly 45 years. Then, seemingly overnight, there was a 4th. And I said then that if the role ever came open, that I would act swiftly. In the interim, I took on responsibilities that the office managing partner didn't care to do, even started calling myself deputy managing partner of the office. And 2 years ago, when the office managing partner decided to leave the firm with a small group and asked me to go with him, instead, I quickly turned down the offer and approached firm leadership about taking over the role when they left. And overnight, I was the managing partner, just like it had happened before. I had a plan and I implemented it. Now as the head of the office, I don't take myself too seriously. I make sure the office has fun. Otherwise, I'm strategic, make tough decisions, treat everyone the same, stay cool under pressure, stay rational, and try to be a creative problem solver. Someone asked me recently how it feels to be everyone's boss of an office of nearly 200 lawyers and 350 total people. I feel like they're all my bosses, actually, that I serve them, that I'm there to make their lives easier. Sometimes I forget, I don't share these stories a lot that I just shared with you, and this is probably the largest group of people that has ever heard my horrifying near-death experience. But the skills and the leadership skills, I do think about a lot. The stories sometimes fade, but the lessons persevere. I know my daughter Ava advocates for me telling these stories more, so she'll be happy to know that I did, even if she's not thrilled about the up-to-date leadership advice. So, thank you for your time, and if you have any questions, I'm here.